props, as Nancy said. Hi, I'm Jess. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jess.
I'm so thankful, first of all, for everybody who takes care of Intergroup, just knowing it's here. I came in here to buy books before I even knew this meeting was here, and kind of wandered around. Someone said, wander around. I went back, oh, they have meetings here. That's cool. And just people who man the phones, who, revived this meeting. So special. I love hearing about that history. I almost wore a suit and a tie because I was kind of picturing like in honor of those April 19th people, but it's just kind of a miracle that back in the day before cell phones or anything, that these books came out, that people could contact world headquarters. I've been in meetings in New York City, and there's kind of a special feeling when you're up there, but that took root here. And it is true when I heard that statement, like just a block from here, because I've shopped at Cash and Carry, the Star Motel's right there. I mean, it's all around us. So I'm really thankful to everyone. And so a little bit about my story. Well, first I wanted to start with a prayer of silence if you want, or a prayer for the newcomer, or if you can't think of any other prayer, just say, please God, help me not judge the next speaker. So I heard that in Al-Anon's speaker tape. I thought it was pretty funny. So I was thinking about this, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And I was thinking actually about how when I was still crawling, I had this incident where I was crawling, and I can remember this, and I knew my parent was down in the basement doing the laundry, and the door of the basement was open. And so I remember like starting to go down the steps and was like, oh, goody, this is fun. And then suddenly I was falling and I got a little concussion, which probably explains a lot about who I am today. But, I think back to that and I think, wow, that same brain that like could remember crawling kind of is a little bit of what made, I think, life sort of unbearable for me, why I ended up drinking a lot. Like having that kind of brain that can remember, it's like everything, there are too many impressions. Sometimes I can't just turn it off. And one of the next memories I have is about being about 8 or 9. And I remember the adults drinking and laughing, and they would drink this magic little potion in little cups, and then they would just be laughing. And I thought, what kind of potion is in those little cups that makes them laugh so much? And I went over and drank some, and it just burned my throat. It was like poison. And I thought, they're drinking poison and they're laughing. It just didn't make any sense to me. But I remember registering that it was like horrible. But later on, I would overcome that because I wanted that same experience of the effects that it had on me. When I was 12, we were living in California, but I was born in New Jersey. And I'm the middle of two other girls who are 21 months on either side of me. And then I have an older half brother and sister from my dad's first marriage. And when I was 6, my father died suddenly. And I think that changed a lot in the sense that I lost a sense of being, my memories before that were good. Like life was fun and there were pets around and we had enough food and, we lived in a beautiful house. I liked playing with neighbors. I liked playing with my siblings. And then after that, things got a little bit more challenging. When I was 9, we moved to California. And if you've ever gone from a small private school in New Jersey to a public school in California, where you're wearing your hand-knit rainbow crocheted sweater, and all the kids think that your accent is funny and that your clothes are funny. I think I wore like tights with like a knit sweater. Anyway, I went from a classroom of 6 kids to a classroom of 50 kids, and was seated next to a girl for spelling, and she's whispered, "I hate you." And I suddenly, oh, and also I had done the times table up to 10, and they had already done 12. So I was always on the back foot from that point on. So I just kind of hunkered down and became a little bit of what I would say is a wallflower. Like I just wanted to, I played outside a lot. I played by myself a lot, and I really didn't want to be noticed because I really didn't want to be made fun of. When I was 12, I was invited to Cassandra's house, and there was a party, and she was the popular girl, and I was there, and I was included, and suddenly they passed a joint around. And I remember being 12 and not having any idea what this was, but I just really wanted to be included. So I would do anything that was put in front of me if it meant that I could be seen as part of the group. When I was 14, my best friend was going to parties. I'd started high school, I was freshman in high school. My best friend was going to parties, and still from that age 8 to 14, no alcohol, no thank you, nothing. I read a lot. I mean, I was actually really into staying home and reading. I liked that fantasy world that books presented. And my girlfriend Annie, my best friend, she said, "We're going to teach you how to guzzle beer so you can go to parties with me." And we went by the baseball field at night, and we stood in the middle of the street, and she said, she taught me how to do it. And the first thing I did was let out this huge belch. And we just laughed and laughed and laughed and giggled so much I thought I would wake the neighbors. But I thought, okay, this is just something I'm going to have to learn to do. And I was invited to the popular girl's house in Ross, California for a party. And they said, "Do you want to do rum and coke?" And I said, "What's that?" And so we were alone in the house, 8 girls. And all I remember was not really remembering anything, waking up at her house and going downstairs, and the mother of the house had made a big plate of scrambled eggs, and I sat down at the table, 14 years old, and all I felt was nauseous. So that was my first experience, was just immediate, like doing way too much, blacking out, and but meanwhile I kind of I went on kind of going to parties, but again being studious. I was good in school. I got into a major university in California, and I went there. And that was wild. I mean, I went from a school of 200 kids to Berkeley, which was like street scene, thousands of people, Ken Kesey parties, whatever. People were doing things that were sort of way, way over my head. But I immediately got into a relationship with a guy who was 16 years older than me. And he traveled around the world. He owned a record company, and so every night we drank a bottle of wine, and that's what adult people did. So there I was still a teenager. He was in his 30s, and I dropped out of school, moved in with him, traveled around the world, and started trying to drink like he did. And that I would go through periods where I would try to sort of keep up with what my boyfriends did. And then I would go through periods where I just did what I wanted to do, which was much more sort of like, I was a dancer. I liked being outdoors. I liked being at the beach. It wasn't something I was fully committed to, was that kind of lifestyle. And I would say that if I look back on that time period, I felt like I was pretty lost. I remember crying in the car with my mom, and I was sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And I said, well, I couldn't find anything good about myself. And I said, well, at least this guy loves me, and he was a big charismatic person who knew famous people. And that for me was like, the one thing I could say about myself that was good. And I even could hear that, I even could hear like, oh, that's, yeah, probably not a good place to be, is when you can't even find one good thing about yourself. Um, I dropped in and out of school. It took me 12 years to finish school. I don't know if I have ADHD or whatever, but I would stay in for a couple of semesters, get A's and B's, do well. I studied French, I studied agroecology, I studied psychology, but then I would, I don't know, I would leave again for a relationship, or I would think there was a different place that I should be, or a different school, or I would be depressed. I couldn't seem to see things through or finish things. Um, when I was 23, I got involved in a serious relationship with someone who later I realized was one of us. And we were together for 5 years, and we got engaged to be married. And when that fell apart when I was 28, I just didn't know what to do with myself. I moved to Central America, and I basically spent the entire year of 1994 partying my way through, studying Spanish, and I don't know, I was chasing something, I was seeking something, I was unhappy. I didn't know how to go back and live in the real world and just kind of, you know, do what I saw women my age doing at that time. So I mean, I was basically, I saw myself as a party girl, but hidden underneath that was the fact that I was sometimes so depressed I couldn't like leave a hotel room. I can remember being in a hotel room in Costa Rica. Nobody knew where I was. It was around my 29th birthday, and I was holed up for 3 days. I couldn't leave the room. 10 people I knew during that year died, which was um, kind of an eye opener. And at the end of that year, after actually witnessing a couple of deaths, I nearly drowned. My friend drowned next to me, and I nearly drowned. And um, it was a wake up call. Like we were swimming. I ended up getting his body out. I had to go through the whole process of getting his cremains home to Philadelphia, or his mom. He was the same age as me, and it was um, on my it was on my 29th birthday. So that was a shocker for me. I thought, do I, like that's how quickly it can happen. I saw how quickly one can be breathing and talking to someone, and then 15 minutes later doing CPR on them. And I had my own near death experience where I thought I was going to drown. So I started thinking, like, if that were it, if that were the end of my story, how would I feel about that? What else would I want to do with my life, or who do I want to be? So that brought me home. I decided that the solution was to become a nun and move into a monastery. Sounds like a joke, but it's true. So when I was 30, I moved to Japan, and I lived there for 6 years in a monastery. At the monastery, the bell rings at 3 a.m. and you get up. You don't have any choice. Someone will come find you. And so we were up from 3 in the morning, meditation, silent meals. I loved the structure. I loved it. I loved not having to make decisions. I loved not having to make money. I loved having someone else tell me what to do. It's a very hierarchical system. And I loved being forced to meditate because it was something that I couldn't, make myself do. And so I lived there, and it was really amazing. And the cool thing also was I didn't really have access to alcohol. Like we would do meditation month, and then maybe like twice a year there'd be a chance to drink alcohol. But what I discovered after living there for a couple of years was that they made this homemade plum wine and someone donated it. So I stole it and I shoved it under the sink. And every morning at 8 a.m. when I was supposed to be cleaning the bathrooms, I'd go fill up a coffee mug with the plum wine. And it, it was like an acceptable way to get through the day, and there were other ways that I tried to distract myself too. But finally, at the end of the 6 years, I moved to Whitby, and I decided to marry another person who was part of that organization. He's my husband to this day. He's English, and we got married partly because I was going back to Japan, but he was here on a religious worker visa, and it just made sense to stay together. We both didn't. He was going to go to England. I was going to go back to Japan, but we decided to stay on Whitby together. So suddenly, I became at 36 in a married relationship. The people who are part of the meditation group gave us a little 1920s cottage to live in. You had to no insulation, just all firewood and cold. Mm-hmm. And I started trying to do things that I don't normally do, like cook dinner for my husband. And I would either burn it or I would start drinking while I was cooking. And then pretty much became a wino. I was drinking about 2 bottles of wine a night. And what I noticed is that when I would drink, I would either cry or I would pick fights with him. And I wasn't proud of that, but I really didn't know what else to do, partly because the way I had dealt with everything in the past was just to flee. If something was uncomfortable, I moved on from relationships, countries, religious practices, schools. I finally did get my degree, but I wasn't using it. And my husband comes from an alcoholic family in England. He was perplexed. He didn't know what was happening. I would do things like get into a fight with him, slam the door, and drive away and go stay in a motel and not tell him where I was. My way of dealing with every big emotion was to just run away from it. I couldn't handle large concepts like grief or even happiness. He was perplexed, but we kind of waddled on for 4 years with me drinking too much, him telling me to stop drinking. I would stop drinking for a while. I would sneak it. I would start up again. And when I was 40, we went out to dinner at Gordon's on Whitby, and I had 2 glasses of champagne, 2 glasses of red wine. Had to be at work at the bank in the morning at 8 a.m. driving. My birthday's in December, so it was right around the holiday time. Pulled over by the Washington State Patrol, handcuffs. And, I said all the typical things like, oh, I've had 2 and all that. So I was booked and did the blow and go. It was slightly over, not even that much. And I honestly felt relieved because for about 1.5 years, I had been driving to work in the morning at the bank, so hungover. And about 3 weeks before I was arrested, I'd been praying to stop, couldn't stop. I had the thought, I'm drinking to drown my thinking, and it's not working. 3 weeks later, I was arrested. I went to court, and so they gave me jail time. The lawyer said, "You're not an alcoholic, so we're not gonna have you do the treatment." I said, "I think I am an alcoholic." He said, "We're gonna have you do the treatment, not do the treatment, because if you do the treatment and you mess up again, you won't get a second chance." So he The DUI probably cost me about 10 grand. It was um, a shocker. I thought, me, nice college girl. um, I went before I remember I was wearing my suit. My husband went with me to the courthouse and to see the judge. And the two girls in the back said, "Are you here for a Dewey?" And I said, "What's a Dewey?" I just didn't know the lingo. Went before the judge, you're going to stop drinking. Yes, Your Honor. And so I was sober for 4 months, and the order came down that I needed to spend 24 hours in jail. So I knew the hall was there. I thought, well, if I go into the hall, I'll find out somebody who knows how to cope with going to jail, because I am scared shitless. And I went to a Tuesday night meeting, 8 p.m. I was shaking like a leaf. They told me, come back tomorrow night. There's a women's meeting at 6. It's still there. I went and they said, oh, here's some numbers. These women have served time. These women have served time. You're going to be fine. My husband drove me to the jail in April of 2026. I went in and did my 24 hours. And I now do jail meetings online because, it's nice memories seeing the inside of the jail. I stayed sober for 5 years. I secretaried meetings. I went to meetings about 5-6 times a week at the Langley Hall. I got a sponsor right away from that first night of Wednesday. The phone numbers, I called the first person on there partly because my grandparents lived in Bedford Hills, New York, which is down the street from where Lois and Bill's house is. And she was from Bedford Hills, New York. So I said, would you be my sponsor? But after 8 times when we got together and never read the book, and we would have lunch and she would complain about her husband, I decided I didn't really need a sponsor. So I sponsored myself for 5 years. Didn't do the steps. And after 5 years when that have been like around 2010, I went to visit a friend in Dublin, and she brought out a glass of wine, and I thought, there's a body of ocean between me and my AA meeting. And then I came home and didn't drink anything again for 10 months. So I thought, no problem here. You don't drink for 10 months, that just shows willpower or something. And I told my husband, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drinking just one tiny medicinal shot of tequila at night with a little lime in it, and that'll relax me so I'm not as mean to you. And I drank for another almost 5 years until my sobriety date is April 18th, 2015. And I went to a party here in Ballard at my girlfriend's house, and I had promised, it was a Friday night, and I'd said to my nephew, who was going to Bush School at the time, I will be there at your soccer game. He was 8, at 8 in the morning. And told my husband and my mom, I'll be back. Next thing I knew, 2 bottles of wine later, having told way too many embarrassing things about myself, I went into her bathroom and curled up on her bath mat so that I could just get the cool tile against my cheek for a little while. And she woke me up at 2 in the morning and put me in bed. And the next morning when I woke up, I was so sick. And I called my aunt, who had many years in AA, and she said, contact AA. I emailed and called AA, and a bunch of people responded, which was a godsend. I still have those emails. And I went home and went to a meeting as soon as we got back to the island. And I've been active in AA ever since. This time, I walked into a meeting and someone was there, a girl who I'd known before, named Stephanie, and she said, "You want to read the big book with me?" And we started reading the big book together every day before we met at the hall. And I did steps 1, 2, and 3 with her. And then Steve was at a meeting. This is the part where the meeting gets good, because the talk gets good. And he said, I was so terrified that I wouldn't get through the steps and I would relapse again. And I didn't know if I would survive it. I've been doing all the things, drinking and driving, and slowly killing myself, waking up with night sweats, getting sicker. And by this time, it's one thing if you're in your 30s, it's another thing when you're in your 50s. So he was in a meeting, and Stephanie had mentioned working with him. And then he said in the meeting, I've gone through 4-step with hundreds of people. So I followed him out to the parking lot, and I said, would you do the 4-step with me? And he said, yeah, come by at 7 in the morning with a binder of paper, just the way we've been doing it with the lines. And gosh, I don't know, it was every morning for, I'm not a really early morning person, but I was there at 7 a.m. And we did that. And it was the first time I saw not just my part, but like there was such a release when I wrote down the first, second, and third column. And then when I got to that fourth column, it was blank. And there was the first one was God. One of them on there was my college, university. And when I said to him, I don't know what the fourth column is. I don't know what my part in this. I have no part in this. And he said, well, are you still carrying it around and thinking about it today? And I said, yes. And he said, you don't have to do that anymore. And it was like, I don't know what happened. Somehow intuitively, there was an amazing sense of freedom and release when I could see that I was doing it to myself. I was the one, beating myself up over and over again with the way that I was recriminating myself for my own thoughts and my own regrets and my own sense of inadequacy. And that was the first time I had seen that. And it fired me up to be really diligent about the steps. So now I've done the steps over several times. I will have to say, for anyone who's had this experience, I don't know if I'm unique in this, but I have a sponsor now. Her name is Marcia. I had about 5 different sponsors. I couldn't seem to get a groove with that. But what has worked for me is to have really good mentors and people I respect in the program who love me and who I can call up. And that's been something that I've really enjoyed learning, is calling someone up and saying, what do you think about this? Does this sound okay? I will just summarize by saying I'm grateful that I'm just one of many alcoholics. I'm grateful that people figured this out at some point, and then I can read the book and be on this path of learning that I don't have to be controlled by all the things that used to control me, my insecurities, my anger, face everything and recover, or fuck everything and run. Fear did rule my life. And now today I meditate. I have a greater sense of faith in something bigger than me, which is something that I never thought would really be personal or true for me. I thought that was for other people. But I do have a growing sense of deep faith. And also it's really important for me to not forget my sense of humor. So I'm going to close with a joke. And that is, a penguin is walking along a sidewalk and he goes into a bar, and he says to the bartender says, can I get you anything? And the penguin says, yeah, I'm looking for my dad. And the bartender says, well, what does he look like? Big takes a second. Anyway, thank you so much for letting me share. I'm so thankful you're here. It's like the penny drops. So quick.
I didn't see it either.
Oh, what would a penguin's dad look like? They all look the same.
They all look the same.
So thank you, and
They look like a penguin.